Hi, Coach TJ.
What's going on, Zoe? We're back.
We are back, and this week we are starting off with some hot or nots, talking about the only 5 supplements that have an evidence-based performance benefits.
I didn't see ketones on this list, and I was disappointed.
They have insufficient evidence to be considered on this list.
But I love silver bullets.
Yes. Well, we aren't talking about silver bullets pretty much ever. Almost even all the supplements that do have evidence supporting them have limited uses and have downsides, right? Like there's absolutely no substance on earth that is like always good all the time in any dosage, right? And then we're going to play a game called This or That, weighing different ways of approaching things in training. So I'm pretty pumped for this episode because it's going to be very sciencey. And I think we'll give people some tangible takeaways about how to think about their training.
Yeah, let's see how the people like the science.
Yeah. So what we're getting into first, our hot or not, is that there are only 5 supplements that have with strong evidence of directly improving athletic performance. And those supplements are creatine, caffeine, nitrates, sodium bicarbonate, and beta-alanine, or alanine. Sorry.
Okay.
Caffeine, first on the list. Cheers. I'm currently drinking a cup of coffee right now.
Caffeinated cheese today?
Haven't had any caffeinated cheese. But caffeine, I think, is an important one to talk about because in studies, caffeine has shown to potentially increase or enhance endurance by 2 to 4% on average. So that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
But a lot of this does depend on dosing and timing. And the majority of studies recommend about 3 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight at either the onset of fatigue or 10 to 60 minutes prior to activity. Where are you at on caffeine? How do you use it in your training or life?
Well, I'm pretty sensitive to caffeine, so I'm a fast responder. I've noticed that throughout my life, I don't need a high dose of caffeine to feel the effects of it, and I use it that way in my racing.
Yeah.
I don't use it a ton in my training, maybe a few long runs leading up to a race, just so I kind of can practice with it a little bit. But I take little salt pills that have caffeine in them, about 20 milligrams per.
Yeah.
And so I supplement my sodium intake with those. So when I feel tired, I just replace normal salt tabs with the salt tabs that have caffeine. I take 2 or 3 of them, which is like kind of like a shot of espresso, which is like the max amount of caffeine at one time that I can kind of tolerate without my head flying away. So I use it that way at the onset of fatigue in racing.
How do you build your caffeine strategy for ultra marathons?
Well, I build it. I go by feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Okay. So what I like to think about when I'm crafting my caffeine strategy is thinking about the race particularly and thinking about starting. I always have, and something I recommend, and we'll talk about a little bit more later, is I'll have my cup of coffee before the race, the same as I do every other day.
Sure.
And then I will try to delay taking in caffeine till later in the race. So I'll have my gels and hydration earlier on in the day, have less caffeine, and I'll gradually increase the caffeine that I intake throughout the day in accordance with what I've tested. So like for Run Rabbit, since it started at noon, I didn't take any caffeine until dark.
That makes sense.
Which, right, like you want to start to increase your caffeine as fatigue sets in to handle things like running through the night. And I didn't think I would need it like right off the bat. A couple caveats here. Again, like you mentioned, not everyone reacts to caffeine the same, and genotype likely plays a huge role in how people respond to caffeine and how they metabolize it. I think that I haven't gotten the genetic test, but I think I'm a slower metabolizer. So I always recommend working with a sports dietitian or tracking your individual response to caffeine with varying caffeine levels to help identify a strategy. Caffeine can increase having to pee a lot, and there can be different side effects with it. So I wouldn't recommend taking in like things like energy drinks or super, super high caffeine options unless you have trialed that in training and you know how you respond.
I completely agree. This isn't something that you just want to try out on race day. This is one of those things that you do want to use in your training. That's how I know when it works and when to do it for me. That's how you develop your strategy as well. So that's the bottom line with this. It's hot if you know how to use it.
Yes.
It's not if you don't. And I think, one of those things that I hear a lot from athletes is like, I should taper my caffeine going into a race and change my normal habits. So that way, like, caffeine has a stronger impact on me and strong performance enhancing benefit. And it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, the research does not support a caffeine taper. So what people will, and this is sort of an outdated idea in endurance sports. So it's something that we see a lot for people who are training for these like really long multi-day events, things like Big's Backyard or 100-mile races. We'll see people think they need to 2 weeks before the event taper off their caffeine usage. In a study that looked at well-trained athletes who were habituated to caffeine, so people who use caffeine daily, there was no performance benefit from curtailing caffeine use 2 weeks prior to their event and then using it during the event. In fact, it can actually be worse for you. People reported withdrawal symptoms in the days leading up to a race, so there was no reported benefit, and even if there was, I think it would be like so marginal. I think it's always best to focus on feeling good and sort of sticking to routine in the days and weeks leading up to an event rather than trying these big dramatic interventions.
Yeah. So tell me something. I don't know actually much about beta-alanine.
Yeah,
Let's get into that.
So this is actually pretty similar to sodium bicarbonate. So we're not going to talk about it too much because we did take a pretty deep dive into sodium bicarbonate in a previous episode. But it's a competition legal supplement, and evidence suggests it can help muscle endurance during high intensity activity. Basically, it can increase a runner's lactate threshold, but it hasn't been studied and seen as effective in distances longer than 1,500 meters.
Ooh, not great for endurance athletes.
Not super relevant for our population. It could be useful if you're looking to finish a sprint in a 5K. It was shown to increase runners' kick capability, but it's really unlikely to improve performance in anything longer than a 5K.
Are you supplementing with this in any way?
No.
I've seen it in some gels. Have you heard of this gel that's made out in India, Unived?
I have heard of it. You used it for a little bit.
I used that for a while, and I think this was one of the things that was in there. And I moved away from those gels, but interesting.
Well, I mean, there's not a reported downside. However, I never recommend taking substances just because there's no reported downside, because that's just not a good heuristic to make decisions from. And it does increase your ability to clear lactate, but that's not really something that in most of the athletes we're working with, we're really looking to do. Like, I do coach a few athletes who run 5Ks. But again, it's like such a marginal gain in those cases, and it's not something I would recommend for like athletes who are looking to run things longer than a 5K. However, I did want to talk about it because it is legal and it is backed up by evidence.
Sure. Let's chat about creatine.
Yeah.
What the heck is creatine?
So just to backtrack a tiny bit, you and I both use caffeine.
Sure.
Neither of us use beta-alanine.
Nope.
Not that athletes should ever make a decision based on what their coach or some rando on a podcast or YouTube does. I just wanted to put it into the context of like how common is the usage of these things. And again, just because something is shown to be beneficial in research doesn't mean it's going to be applicable to 100% of athletes 100% of the time. So caffeine, slightly more widely used, supported by evidence, and shown to be more beneficial across a wider population. Beta-alanine, not as much. Pretty similar to sodium bicarbonate. Creatine. So creatine monohydrate, which is the most widely used form of this supplement. It's also the most widely researched, and the safest form of creatine can be taken as like a daily supplement to increase the amount of creatine that you have in your body.
Why would you want to increase the amount of creatine?
That's a great question. Creatine helps produce and release energy during exercise. So we need that for our muscles to contract and work properly, and it also helps maintain a balanced pH level in our bodies during exercise. So the performance benefit comes from, like, if you have adequate stores of creatine in the body, it can benefit performance during high intensity exercise by preventing fatigue. It can also support an increase in lean muscle mass, muscle strength, and power. So the way that athletes can take the supplement is you can max out your creatine levels in a week by taking 20 grams a day, which is pretty significant, split into 4 daily doses. Then you can switch to a maintenance load of 3 to 5 grams per day. You could also skip the loading phase and just stick to 3 to 5 grams, in which case it'll take about 4 weeks to max out.
How do people usually consume this?
As a powder or a pill?
I've never used ever as an athlete.
We'll get to that later. So this latter approach might be less likely to cause water-related weight gain, which is a really common side effect of creatine usage.
Is that why there's an association of using creatine for like heavy weightlifters? They want to get big?
We'll talk about when you think about the performance benefits it lends are, it's for building lean muscle mass and increasing power output and muscular strength. So yes, those are benefits that runners probably want, but it's been more largely focused on by the weightlifting and bodybuilding community as opposed to runners. But now that endurance athletes are starting to have a more holistic view of what it means to be an endurance athlete, we're seeing a much more increased emphasis on building lean muscle mass in the running community. So that's why people are sort of taking a second look at the supplement for endurance athletes.
All right.
And there are plenty of fancy creatines on the market. None have been shown to outperform the cheapest and most basic version, creatine monohydrate. But once your creatine levels are high, if you stop supplementing, they'll take about a month to drift back down to baseline levels. So you can cycle on and off creatine depending on your training and racing goals. So you want to aim to take creatine close to your workout or right after, ideally with some carbohydrate, you'll see it a lot in like a recovery drink. There's also some evidence that suggests that women have higher baseline creatine levels and thus get a slightly diminished benefit from supplementation. But most generally, as with literally everything in life, there's a ton of individual variation. So the only way that you know how to respond is to try it. So the primary benefits being on your ability to perform during high intensity exercise by preventing fatigue. Cons being it isn't always going to lead to better endurance at these lower output sort of events. So again, for ultra runners, and there can be water weight gain associated with it, which can be not a happy place for all athletes. So this is another one I don't wholeheartedly recommend by any means, but again, it is sort of being shown in increasing research to have some benefits, even if those benefits are limited to high intensity exercise and sort of muscle building applications.
Interesting. I feel like we're going to end up getting a lot of emails about this. How can I incorporate creatine? And I'm like, you know what? This is when you talk to your dietitian.
Yeah, as with anything, right? And again, athletes need to be so careful on all of this stuff and make sure that anything that they take is safe for sport, works with whatever other medications and supplements they might have been recommended by a trained professional. And again, there's a ton of individual variation. There is no silver bullet. And even though, again, my bottom line for all of this stuff is these are shown to have performance benefits, but that doesn't mean they're going to be always useful for every athlete all of the time. Yeah.
All right. What's left? Nitrates?
Nitrates. So this is another one.
Nitrates. I'm just going to say hot right now.
Okay, great. This is another one we talked about pretty recently, nitrates being found in things like beet juice, beetroot. So here, the performance benefits are that it can improve oxygen costs or lower. Nitrates can lower the amount of oxygen required for exercise. One study found that 6 days of nitrate supplementation decreased the amount of oxygen needed for moderate work by 7% and severe intensity running by 15%. Nitrates have been shown in the research to increase mitochondrial efficiency, so increasing energy production within the mitochondria. They can also aid with muscle contraction. They improve muscle contraction efficiency and contractility. They've also been shown to increase time to exhaustion for long distance running. And there's some limited evidence that they may provide benefits during for cognitive function during exercise.
Ooh, yeah. Should I consume it during exercise?
I wouldn't. There's no research that recommends drinking beetroot during exercise, and likely that would just end up with you having some very terrifyingly colored urine. Supplementary research has showed a reduction in time to peak hour output, but reported no improvement in repeat sprint performance over a 30-second sprint, suggesting the ergogenic effect is limited to shorter, more explosive sprints. So the bottom line for all of this, again, is limited test case can be a little bit more beneficial for endurance athletes, thinking of that lowered oxygen cost. But also I would say that nitrates are something that like you're probably going to be getting plenty of if you eat a healthy diet with lots of leafy greens and with some beets. I'm not going to tell people to rush out to the, vitamin cottage and stock up on nitrates. There can be some benefit to it, but again, it's going to be pretty minimal, even though it is, again, backed by evidence, which is why we wanted to bring it up. But it's definitely not a silver bullet, and it's definitely not going to catapult you to the next level in training without doing anything else.
This is my silver bullet.
Yeah.
This is the thing that has gotten me on every podium in the last 6.5 years.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Athletes know, listeners know my dry sense of humor out there. But I do like to take beet juice. I like to drink it. I think it tastes pretty good, and the reported benefits I think are worth pursuing at a very low, cost. Beet juice isn't very expensive. Drink a cup or two a day.
Cup or two of beet juice?
Yeah,
every single day.
A little 8-ounce cup.
That's a shit ton of beet juice.
Nice.
You have never consumed that much beet juice.
I did. Did you see me drink an entire bottle of beet juice?
That would have been 4 cups.
Western States?
That's 4 cups.
I drink an entire bottle before Western States.
If you want to do that before your next race, that's great. My recommendation would be to just take a solid look at your diet and think about incorporating some nitrate-rich foods. A great side effect is that a lot of these foods are also pretty high in iron, which is something that a lot of our athletes are looking to increase in their diet as well. So the next game I sort of want to play is called This or That. And I wanted to sort of weigh how should athletes think about different parts of their training and weigh different frameworks. So TJ, first I wanted to ask you, the first question I wanted to ask is, should athletes track their training by time or miles? How do you personally track your training?
I have been on a miles-based training program for 6.5 years. I personally don't think it's the best way to track and assess training load for trail runners specifically. I think there could be some, it could be helpful maybe for marathoners and for athletes looking at shorter distances. But overall, I think the functionality of time is much more appropriate for athletes, especially from not just from a performance and a stress management view, but also from a time management perspective. Most people don't know how long it's going to take them to run 6 miles on a given day based on how they feel. And a lot of people don't have the time in their schedule to allow for even sometimes a 5-minute difference in how long it might take to do their training. So I think it's so much easier via scheduling to go by time. And then I also think from a perspective of like the body doesn't really know what a mile is, but like we can more accurately assess stress week to week when we look at how much time you're putting into your training. And there's some very hard rules that we've also talked about in terms of preparation for ultras. And it's very much based on time in all those scenarios.
Yeah.
There are a few caveats, which I feel like you're about to just mention.
Well, no, I just think like the thing that I really like about this question is I think it can help athletes better understand what training is and what the objectives are of training. So the thing to understand, like you said, the body doesn't know miles. It also doesn't necessarily know time. So both understanding volume as time or as miles, we're just doing our best to approximate the stress / stimulus we're placing on the body. So it's about trying to get to a more honest understanding of the stress that we're putting on the body. For instance, a 2-hour run, a 2-hour or a 10-mile run would be very different if there's 4,000 feet of climbing in it, right? So, you know, you might only cover 6 miles in 2 hours if it's very steep and very technical, but that's still going to be encountered by your body as higher stress than the same amount of distance run around town in perfect 50-degree temps, right? So in a lot of cases, I think time can be a better understanding of training volume. However, a lot of times, particularly on long runs, if we're training an athlete for a specific event that's measured in distance, right? Like if you're training for a 50K or if you're training for a marathon or a 100 miler, a lot of times we do want to get comfortable covering a specific distance in miles, right? Like if you only ever prescribe training by time and you're trying to get someone ready for a 100 miler, it can be really tough to get them to cover a specific distance if you're prescribing by time.
And I think it also can, especially for newer athletes who don't know like approximately how much time it takes to cover certain distances.
Right. It can be hard to route plan.
Yeah. And it can also be hard then to extrapolate like in terms of race planning. Like, how long will it take me to do this section? How long will it take me to do that section? Okay, here's a tangible example of when I ran 12 miles. It took me this amount of time with this much vert. So I do think some of those mileage-based goals are really important to have, especially for newer athletes as they move through their training. I think with more advanced athletes, I stick pretty firmly to a time-based training load, even for those bigger long runs, with the caveat of maybe 1 or 2 sessions in a build that will be specific mileage-based goals.
I really use a hybrid approach with many of my athletes. Particularly during the week, I'll ascribe volume by time because a lot of my athletes are busy. So it's like easier for them to wrap their head around, okay, I'm going out for 50 minutes or I'm going out for 60 minutes as opposed to 6, 7, 8 miles.
Yeah.
And that can really help people avoid slogging or going longer than they need to during the week, which is when most people are time limited. However, in the winter, sometimes I'll prescribe training volume by time. But particularly when I have athletes training for specific races, I do give that long run volume as mileage as opposed to time.
Yeah, I would run a lot more overall mileage in the winter if my coach gave me my training via miles. It just does not take very long to do 16 miles for me in the winter. It's like I do so many runs that are just like an hour and 50 minutes or 2 hours, and it doesn't seem like a lot of volume, honestly.
Yeah, I like to cap athletes in the winter. A lot of times I'll have folks just do 2 hours because that's sort of like a nice amount of time where like you're going longer, like you're going long enough that you need to fuel and you're emptying those glycogen stores and you really are getting into that sort of the volume that actually does help build endurance.
Yeah, totally. Oh, man. A good coach should understand both time and miles.
Exactly,
honestly.
which is like why like my approach is so dependent on the athlete. Some people struggle with like time-based training. Like they'll see 60 minutes as a challenge to see how far they can go in 60 minutes as opposed to how easy can you run in 60 minutes and how can we keep this effort honest. But I also have some athlete or like some athletes, when I give them that time-based training during the week, they're sort of like that. I would really rather just have miles so that I can think about it in terms of a specific route, and then I trust them to just keep the effort honest and easy as well.
I think it's important to have that conversation and make sure that those kind of standards are set,
Correct.
Like I had a similar conversation with one of my emerging elite level 100-mile athletes that I'm coaching, and he's on a mileage-based plan. I was like, I really feel like maybe we should go to time. And he was like, for these reasons, like miles really are serving me right now. And I was like, okay, I see that perspective. But let's just make sure we're meeting in the middle here. Like, I don't care if you end up being time limited, that 8-mile run still needs to be easy.
Yeah. It's
not going to be easy moderate. It's not going to be moderate. Okay, we're in agreement. Excellent.
Which is why that effort level is such an important part of that conversation. And it's sort of like, again, what framework, mileage, or time is the best way to help an athlete tune into what the actual intent of the stimulus is. And a lot of times, like even the way that I tend to build workouts for athletes, a lot of times is a combination of miles and time, which I know isn't always super helpful for some people's brains, but I'll tend to have my warm up and cool down in the form of 2 to 3 miles for athletes, and then I'll have a time-based workout in the middle of it. That way people just aren't confined to the track, and they're really able to hone in on that effort.
Cool.
Yeah. But the bottom line is when you move to different terrain and you run slower or faster, you need to have a consistent basis to assess if your load is increasing, decreasing, or remaining the same. There is no one size fits all. It really depends on the athlete. It depends on their goals. It depends on what kind of terrain they're training in. But the sort of takeaway here for everyone is think about what the actual intent of the stimulus is. And remember that stress is stress, and there is no perfect way of measuring it. And so sometimes it can be helpful to toggle back and forth depending on what your needs and goals in a particular training moment are.
Absolutely. All right, let's go heart rate or RPE.
Yeah. So we've talked about this before, but we're going to say it again. There are many factors that influence heart rate, like heat, altitude, dehydration, how much caffeine you've had, and relative perceived effort provides a more reliable measure of intensity that accounts for all physiological and environmental effects. So this is one where I pretty more staunchly endorse RPE as opposed to heart rate. And we've talked about this on our previous episodes, but occasionally I will have an athlete use heart rate if I feel that they don't understand perceived effort, or if they're in a period of higher stress and sort of their baseline calibration might be off. Like if someone moves to altitude from sea level, it can be helpful. If we're coming back from concerted time off, it can be helpful. But I never want athletes to use a heart rate strap or use their watch, and if they're out on an easy run and their heart rate gets I want people to make decisions based on how their body feels, not what their watch is telling them, because there is actually so much more chance for error when you introduce technology versus chance for error when it comes to interpreting the signs and signals your body is giving you. Your body is so smart, and the goal of a coach is to help athletes get better at understanding their bodies, not get more dependent on technology. So sometimes, I'll have athletes be like, well, I was running up a hill and then my watch told me I was running too hard, so I started to walk. And I'm like, you could have just finished running up the hill and then bring your heart rate back to baseline. That's a much more helpful way to train than allowing your watch to dictate your effort level.
Yeah, no notes.
That's all you have to say about that?
No notes.
How do you get better? How do you coach your athletes towards a better understanding of RPE? What do you have them pay attention to?
Breath rate and kind of the feeling of resistance in the legs. We provide every athlete with an RPE. How would you
scale?
Scale, yeah, scale.
Not the Borg scale, though. That one is, I think, too much.
A scale. Just 1 to 10. Very, very simple with the kind of the qualities of how you would feel running in that effort level. And it's been shown back by research that this is a very reliable way of getting into the right energy zones and making sure you're targeting like the right intensity for your workouts. So I stick with that. Like almost every single workout I prescribe, especially for newer athletes, less than 2 years training history with me, is going to be workouts on a 1 to 10 scale.
Yeah.
I might, like prescribe like a 10K workout or 5K, but I usually correlate that again with a number on the scale.
Right.
Even though I don't think the scale necessarily matches up 100% for some of those the subtle differences between like a 10 and a 5K effort. But I think there's enough there to get athletes started. And so like this is a process of developing awareness. Being an athlete is a process of developing awareness. Like you said, you are your own best heart rate monitor. Like you don't need to wear one to know what you're at if you're actually listening to your body, and then you're taking some time to provide yourself feedback on how you felt on a given run. Which is the whole point of why, we have athletes check into their training log every day. That way they can, account for themselves how they feel. And then, the coach can also, take that information and use that to see if there's patterns that are, emerging over time. But if the athlete doesn't participate in those things, they don't get much out of the training, quite honestly, in my opinion. So
I agree. That's why we really emphasize the daily reflection on your run, because that's a great tool for getting better at understanding how did this actually feel in my body, and helping athletes understand, like, sure, there might be a couple moments where you exceeded a purely easy effort, right? Like when we put strides or hill strides in the context of an easy run, that doesn't mean that the entire run should, it definitely doesn't mean the entire run should feel like an 8 or 9 out of 10. There's just a minute to a few seconds of that run that are going to be 9 to 10 out of 10 effort because of the hills or because of the strides.
Right.
But we want the majority of the run to feel easy, and like sort of after you're done with the run, you should be like, yeah, that run was easy, even though there were a few moments at a higher intensity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think no notes again.
Great. Oh my gosh, am I the greatest coach who's ever lived? So let's talk about vertical gain, TJ. This is something we get a lot of questions about: how to track Vert, how to integrate Vert into training. So Vert, should you track it in terms of feet of change? Or my thesis is that athletes should track Vert in terms of feet of change per mile, not total gain. So vertical gain can be measured like a badge of honor among athletes. You can see folks on Strava racking up just crazy numbers, but that doesn't always correlate with training effectiveness, because what your body actually cares about is how your hips, your knees, and your ankles work at different angles. So what this means in practice is that what is important is matching the vertical gain and loss per mile in training with what you'll experience at your event. For instance, I'm training for the Leadville 100, so I'm trying to emulate the specific demands of that event in my training. So I'm trying to find hills that are of an approximate similar grade to different climbs on that course. So I'm trying to simulate the power line climb with different climbs. I'm trying to simulate the Hope Pass climb in addition to actually doing the Hope Pass climb, because basically going out and doing hill repeats to rack up the same amount of Vert as Hope Pass is a fundamentally different and less productive stimulus than running the actual running similar terrain to that. How do you help athletes think about how they should distribute vertical gain throughout the course of a training week?
Yeah, so I feel like you were trying to make a distinction between like what individual runs should look like and then like what the total elevation gain is at the end of the week. And so like I felt like what you were saying there, Zoe, was like the total elevation gain at the end of the week is like should always be relative to what you're going to see in your race. So this is kind of like the heart and soul of specific training for your event, specific preparation for your event. So it's like if you're getting X number of Vert, but it's not the same elevation change per mile, you're not actually training for the specific race. Like you're not training for the specific demands of your race. And an athlete might ask, well, if you're getting, a bunch of elevation gain at the end of each week, how is it like bad or not enough? And it's just like how you're experiencing that Vert is what matters.
Right.
Like you were trying to described there. It's like the Vert on Hope Pass is way different than the Vert running from Leadville to Mayqueen, for example. And so, like, if we're going to prioritize this in some way to fit specific training, I love that lens because it's always goal focused. We want to probably focus on the hardest parts of that elevation profile. If we were to look at Leadville and look at the elevation gain per mile, 100-mile, divide 13,000 feet by 100, and you get that number. And it's going to look like the race is really flat, and we're not going to pay attention to the fact that, like, a lot of that vert is, like, in 4 specific moments in the race. The first time you go on power line, then the first time up Hope Pass, and the second time on the way back Hope, and then back over Hope Pass, back over power line again. And so that vert is hitting in really specific moments. Those are likely going to be the cruxiest parts of the race. And so therefore you have to extrapolate from that portion of the race what volume to do, what amount of volume and vertical gain to do to get the specific adaptations that you need to be prepared. And I would then be thinking about that as specific elevation change per mile. Like your vert over the course of the week, great. But if your long run doesn't mimic what the demands of the race are, you're not going to be prepared. So that's where we want to focus.
Right. Particularly when it comes to races, like 100-mile races, like mountain races that have prolonged climbs and descents. Again, doing 3 1,000-foot climbs is a totally different stimulus than 1 3,000-foot climb.
Right.
Similarly, 3 1,000-foot descents, fundamentally different stimulus than 1 3,000-foot descent. The amount of accumulated fatigue you'll get from prolonged climbs and prolonged descents is a specific stimulus that we want to drill, as opposed to just saying, like, look, the numbers are more or less add up.
So in the specific circumstance of looking at a race like Leadville, if you were going to look at the elevation change per mile in the context of the entire race, you would likely not be practicing any 2,000 or 3,000 vertical foot descents.
Right.
But
you would just say, like, oh, there's about 2,000 feet of, I think it might even be less. Like the average vert and descent per mile would be an unusable it would be an unhelpful number that would totally disguise the specific dynamics of that event, which combines several very steep concentrated climbs with a lot of flat running. So what can happen when athletes just look at the total gain and try to extrapolate that over the week is you can miss the specifics of doing those prolonged climbs and descents and also doing the prolonged flat running. You might think that you can just, like, there'll be a bunch of undulating terrain, which is not the case for Leadville. So I always want athletes to look at the specific elevation profile of their event and then see what terrain is available to them and what's going to be a close approximation of the specific demands of the specific climbing and descending demands of their event.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean you have to move out to wherever your course is and drill it, but the more specific you can get, particularly on your long runs, because I don't think it's practical for most athletes to be doing prolonged climbs and descents, in the course of their normal work week. Most people don't have access to that type of terrain. And that's where, again, it's not very helpful to get, like, obsessed with the specifics and try to, like, do hill repeats or sort of, like, try to hack your way to the numbers.
Agreed. No more notes. No more notes, Zoe. You're nailing it today.
So the last thing I wanted to touch on briefly here is the importance of patience. I think this is a big value for you. Can you tell me why patience is important for you as an athlete and coach?
Oh my gosh. I like to think about it as the art of patience. This is something that you cultivate over many years of being an athlete who's engaged in a process of continual growth and learning. With the main thing to underline is progress isn't always linear.
That's correct.
And as with the coaching lens, this looks like every athlete responds to training stress differently.
Right.
Like adaptations take place for every athlete on a different time scale. Yes, there are certain principles we can adhere to and things we can expect. But honestly, the way these things express themselves are different for everyone. So you have to be patient with yourself in the process of realizing those adaptations and like the actual tangible byproducts of doing the work. And then from an athletic standpoint, this looks like, being present, fully present for all of the parts of the journey. That means like when you fail and you don't reach your goal, when you're on a plateau and you don't feel like you're getting better, I don't know, like when you are injured or sick or a life thing comes up that throws you off and makes you like train in a different way or look at your training in a different way, you have to be fully present and say, these are inherent parts of a long-term approach to becoming a better athlete and a better person. There is no specific timeline or way that this goes, but it just goes. And if you stay consistent, it will create growth and learning for you over time.
Yeah, I think a challenge for a lot of athletes, particularly newer athletes, is they think that training and progress will always be fast, fun, and easy. When in fact, when you look at there's so much, and I think that this is conveyed from our culture when you see things like couch to 5K and 10 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. Like one single training cycle is really not enough to produce very meaningful adaptations, particularly not ones that stick. Yeah. It's like maybe enough to reduce some instances of injury, but it's definitely not enough to get anywhere near, definitely not near reaching your potential, and like not enough to meaningfully improve. Adaptations happen over weeks and months. When we look at how training really happens in our bodies, again, we're looking to improve things like the durability of our bones, the durability and size and efficiency of our muscles. We're looking to improve things right down to the cellular level with angiogenesis and building dense mitochondrial beds. And those are things that don't happen over the course of a few runs.
Yeah.
And that's why we personally at our coaching organization, we ask athletes to commit to at minimum 6 months of training, because we don't believe, and there's no evidence that indicates that these adaptations and interventions can be successful in a shorter time frame.
Totally. And 6 months is honestly, it's not a lot of time to produce anything.
How long have you been training?
I've been with my coach for 6.5 years.
Yeah, I've been with my coach for 6 years. And you've been training consistently the entire time. No big breaks.
No, none.
Yeah.
And I've had plenty of life things come up, like a divorce, moving, losing sponsorships, gaining sponsorships, leaving a professional career as an athlete, changing a
starting
career,
starting a business,
growing this business, just countless disruptions. And the key is to stay in it as much as you can and
stay the course. And that doesn't mean you're always trying to train for a huge event when life gets hard, but it means that training and healthy, joyful movement can be a part of whatever life chapter you're in.
Exactly. And good training accounts for those things and adjusts for them. If you're an athlete who, I think every athlete needs to look, they need to take a hard look at themselves. Am I the kind of person that stops doing things when life gets hard? Okay, what can I do to change that? Because if I was to continue to stop doing things every time my priorities changed, or every time I didn't feel like progress was as tangible, or anytime there was a challenge, or anytime, the way I looked at training changed, I simply wouldn't have been able to do Western States.
Right.
I wouldn't have done CCC. I wouldn't have done Leadville. I would have not, this business wouldn't be what it is.
Right. Like if you just decided to stop coaching every time it was hard, or every time an athlete quit, or every time an athlete or a client got upset with you, there'd be no business.
Totally. And I think that's just, it is a choice. People feel it's not a choice, but it's a choice.
Patience is a choice, and it is a trainable habit as well.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
Think, some people sort of baseline for patience, I think maybe your baseline for patience is higher than mine, but I've been intentionally working on developing mine over over the course of years.
What do you do to develop your patience? Is it self-talk? Is it like zooming out? Is there
Zooming
like
out.
a specific strategy?
Yeah. Zooming out is very, very helpful. And remembering that I feel like that, and also like looking at the evidence, right? Like there's just no evidence that suggests that quitting when things get hard leads to better outcomes.
No, it leads to comfort in the moment, but comfort doesn't create growth, unfortunately.
Right.
Or else I'd be really good at growing.
Yeah. And I think, you've been really lucky in that you haven't had a lot of big injuries in your running career. I've had a couple that have sidelined me for, up to months at a time.
Yeah, you have.
And I think that, it's not something I'd ever wish on people, but injury can be an amazing teacher of patience. And something that I see a lot in athletes is that folks who rush injury recover can really delay healing, particularly if people have maybe an injury that's related to stress, overtraining, under recovery, or under fueling. A lot of times, like, we'll see folks want to, okay, now I can't run, so I'm going to go out and bike 50 miles a day. I'm going to bike for 3 hours every single day. And a lot of times that will paper over the sort of underlying conditions that might have contributed to that injury.
I would you mind sharing just a little bit of some of the personal insights that you gained through a couple of your Achilles injury? I think you had a pelvis thing.
Yeah.
Because I think that those were fundamental teachers for you. Like, I don't know, just the way that I am and having such I started meditating at 13 years old. I'm 37 years old. That's a long time to change, like, my neural chemistry or whatever. Like, I'm just by nature very patient. And I think we're pretty opposite in that sense. So, but I've noticed you become more patient and
getting older is helpful.
Yeah,
right?
but I think like there were a couple like moments that really those injuries really pushed you. And I think they pushed you to look at things differently. So I'm wondering if you can just share kind of those experiences. So I think they'll be helpful.
A couple key points are that injury has always forced me to examine my relationship with exercise and to keep it in check and in perspective. That's been a persistent struggle in my life, is not to have movement be my only or my primary method for self-soothing and for coping with stress and for navigating feelings of stress. And I think that when you get injured, you immediately rush to panic about your ability to exercise, that should prompt some serious introspection, ideally with a trained mental health professional, because for me, it helped me realize that I had exercise dependency and that was an issue I needed to address head on with a trained mental health professional.
Yeah.
So it helped me be judicious about exercise rather than obsessive or like immediately that was like the only thing I knew how to do. And it helped me invest in other parts of my life as well. And then on the other hand, injury has also helped me embrace being a more full athlete. I love running. Running is my number one sport. I do have a bike. I do have skis. I don't live to ski or bike. I ski and bike to get better at running primarily and to have some fun, healthful, joyful, low impact movement that isn't running. And being a more well-rounded athlete can be really helpful as well. Again, we never want to just go ham, right? We never want to use cross training to paper over these things. And a lot of times I'll see athletes sometimes I'll see athletes cross-train so hard that they undermine their recovery. So we always want to avoid that. But I do think that things like strength training, low-impact cross-training can be really valuable tools for athletes, particularly if you need a lower impact option or if you have a movement pattern that needs to be corrected through strength and mobility. So I would just always urge athletes that a patient approach to injury recovery ensures a full recovery and that you should use active recovery exercises, but be really careful to not overdo it. And I also think patience is a really valuable tool in racing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Vital.
Pacing yourself and being really strategic about your racing will always lead to a better performance. And for me, what this means is not getting swept up in the excitement and sticking to your plan. I'll see people do absolutely wild shit at the start of races, and I just always have to come back to, I know how to run my race. I don't know what other people are doing. I'm not going to follow them, and I'm not going to freak out that people might be going way faster than I want to, or I feel comfortable at the start of an event. And I think it's also so important. Another part of patience, particularly for longer events, is we don't just do these things. Like if you think about a 100-mile race, particularly, the finish line itself is 0.00001% of the entire event. So if you only enjoy the finish line, you are missing out on so much enjoyment along the way. So make sure that you are actually enjoying these events that you're running, right? Like even when it's hard, even when you're in the pain cave, even when you're, maybe on the struggle bus a little bit, remind yourself that it's something you chose, and what a privilege to be able to choose this type of pressure.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I want to take it a step further, because the finish line, the meaning that comes from that does not just come from the race itself. It comes from the training process, the obstacles you've overcome, the time you've put into it, the uncertainty you embraced. The finish line has its meaning because of the total accumulation of all the moments that went into producing that. And that goes well beyond the race. So again, back to that joy factor and thinking about patience, like the more you try to cultivate joy in a patient process of nonlinear growth, the more those finish lines are going to mean to you.
Yeah, I love it. Patience, also a performance enhancing substance.
The number one.
I would say caffeine's the number one.
I wish I could drink patience.
I will have a double shot of patience, please.
All right, guys, thanks so much for listening. If you've got questions, feedback, microcosmcoaching@gmail.com. And we'd love to work with you guys. If you're interested in chatting about coaching and what that might look like for you, give us an email.
Yeah, schedule a free consultation call at microcosm-coaching.com.
All right, have a good one.